Hello, welcome to Miss Peepers Reading Corner. I'm Katrina, aka Miss Peepers. Let's talk about books. Today I want to get into the topic, why aren't people reading anymore? Now that's probably a bit of an exaggeration. I mean, you're here watching a booktube channel, so chances are you read. I read, lots of people still do. But one person's anecdote is not exactly scientific. I mean, no individual has a perfect subsection of the population in their circle. So I asked the question, is this even a real thing? Is it just a perception? Is it just media headlines pretending that we're headed to some sort of illiterate apocalypse? Do people actually read less than they used to? According to Gallup, that big polling company, yes, people do read less than they used to. From 1990 to 2021, the average number of books read by American adults dropped from 15.3 to 12.6. And I'll link to my sources in the description. Probably doesn't sound like a huge number over 20 years, and it doesn't, but it's definitely a noticeable decline. And it makes me wonder, why even is that? In the poll, Gallup didn't get into the reasons for reading less, but there's an article where they throw a few hypotheses out there. I have some thoughts of my own, and so I thought I'd make this video to share them. Please note that this is my opinion. I am not a researcher. I'm just taking some things that I have found and connecting dots. So I'm curious whether you agree with these or not, and are there any that I didn't think about? So I broke this list into two main categories. The first is things that everyone faces, pretty much universally, at least, again, focusing on the US. And then the second category is focused on more specific populations, which I'll get into later. So first, the big culprit that everybody likes to point to, technology and related distractions. Look, I have a smartphone. And I also know that smartphones suck at your attention, and they're designed to do that. You can get notifications on literally anything that you could possibly want, and they make noise, they're loud, they grab your attention. They're designed that way. And while I do think that the rise in technology has gotten into our way and does make it harder for us to focus on things, this is not the only thing that is pulling us away from reading. Technology is kind of pointed to as the easy culprit, and while I think it's a factor, I don't think it's the only one. Weirdly, though we have all of this time-saving technology, in addition to just sapping away at our mental resources, it doesn't actually seem to be saving us all that much time, especially in the US, where our Puritan roots have raised productivity onto this virtuous pedestal. We find ourselves taking that time saved by technology and turning it into more opportunities to be productive, to run, to hustle, to make money, to add value, to produce something. So we fill up all those extra hours with things that seem or feel active to us. We often, as adults, think of reading as a hobby and hobbies as non-productive. And I could go on a whole rant about corporate America and how the 45+ hour work week has become a norm, and that's definitely messing with our brains. But that's not what this video is about. My bookish point here is that we all feel that our time is being sucked away for other things, and we feel like we can't spend it on things we want to do or things that we feel like don't add value. And that's really unfortunate, because doing something for yourself can have a profound effect on your ability to do things for other people. And then stress caused by not feeling like you have enough time, caused by feeling like you have to spend your time on something else, whether it's your job or your children or your family or your friends' social events, all of these commitments that we sign ourselves up for. Some are necessary. I mean, you gotta work to make money, to pay your bills, of course. I'm not saying go out and quit your job, and I'm not saying drop your kids at grandma's and never come back. I'm not saying any of that, but we don't always do a good job of balancing for ourselves where we should be spending our time, and where we can most effectively spend our time, and what things we can say no to. We don't say no enough as adults and as members of society, we feel like we have to say yes to everything. There are a ton of great books on burnout, including one by Emily Nagoski and Amelia Nagoski, which I just love, literally called Burnout, The Secret to Unlocking the Stress Cycle. And it's very helpful if that's what you're dealing with. But all of this is to say that when our mental resources are drained on other things, it's really hard to sit down, open a book, focus on words for more than a sentence or two. I've definitely run into this where I feel like my brain just doesn't quite want to focus. My brain doesn't want to focus all the time, and we all experience that. Now, those are some things that affect basically everyone, but there are also some systemic reasons that we see a decline in reading and a decline in people wanting to read. First, it's the American public school system. I've lived my entire life in the US and I attended public schools. And I don't know about you, but when I was in school, assigned reading was a chore. And I know that I'm coming from a privileged place in that I was in a good school system. My parents are both highly educated. Reading was prioritized in our household. And I did actually love reading. I've always loved reading. There's something different about being assigned a book and having to read it, and then the way that literature is taught in American public schools, or at least was when I was growing up, and from what I can tell, it hasn't changed a whole lot. In an attempt to teach children how to read critically, which is a really important skill, it is, we tend to forget to teach children to read for fun. So, and you can do both at the same time, but there's this punishment system, if you will, that if you don't notice every single symbol, every single theme, if you don't connect that one line to this Bible verse or that Shakespeare play, or you don't realize that the main character always wears red because they have a fiery and passionate personality or some nonsense, like all this stuff, that's what you are graded on, and that's what you have to focus on. And so that can, if that's all you're doing all the time, that can suck the joy out of reading. And I'm not an educator, so I don't have like a magical solution other than to say that it should be okay to read for fun sometimes. And I think that the way that our school system is organized, this is not teachers' fault, by the way. This is not the fault of educators. They are overwhelmed, way underpaid, and not set up for success, in that schools get their funding in part from the results of standardized testing. Teacher teaches the students to pass a standardized test. If they pass, if they do well, then the school looks good and the school gets more money. And then the teacher has to, again, teach to the standardized test to keep that funding coming. The system is meant to reward schools that are doing well and encourage schools to do better. But the problem is that if you don't start out from a place of having the appropriate resources and the appropriate support to do well, then you're never going to get to that same level. And so all it does is it makes the well-funded schools better funded and the less funded schools less funded, and that doesn't really help. I know that's a simplification. I'm definitely not an expert, but I definitely felt that when I was in school, the important thing was making sure that you could demonstrate in a very specific way that you'd learned a very specific set of things. And so it was never, tell me what you loved about this book. Tell me what you didn't like about this book. It did not matter in school whether you liked the book or not. That's my point. It did not matter whether you liked the book or not. That was irrelevant. What mattered was, did you figure out what the themes were? Did you figure out the symbols? Did you understand the narrative arc? And could you chart it out? On top of that, and I think this is still a problem, but certainly when I was in school, the majority of the authors are white that you're reading. The majority of them are men. You have like a couple of, diversity pieces thrown in there, but for the most part, we've been teaching the same literature and the same books for so many decades and not doing a great job of incorporating new work in. And that's not to say that I don't think there's value in learning Shakespeare, but there's also value in learning James Baldwin. And I think it's kind of a ridiculous failure of the school system that I never heard of James Baldwin until I was in my 30s. That's ridiculous. And I know why. It's because he was Black and he was queer. And that's really unfortunate because that's exactly the kind of diversity, and obviously there are more modern examples as well, but like that's the diversity that we need in what we're learning. The curriculum hasn't changed significantly from what I can tell. That's You get a bunch of students who are reading work by authors who are not like them, about characters who are not like them, and they're going to be less likely to enjoy that work. And they're not going to know that they can seek out work that speaks to them. And also, it doesn't give you an appreciation for work that's different. It just makes you think that that's all there is. And so why bother? I don't like it. Another big factor is just access to books in general. So I did talk about the lack of diversity in the curriculum of books that are put out there, but then there are also school libraries. And you might say, well, Ms. Peepers, why don't they just go to the library? Like, you've got your librarian who can point you to different books. A lot of school libraries and also an increasing number of public libraries are under fire from people challenging and attempting to ban books or successfully banning books. I'm very anti-censorship. One of my favorite books is Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury, and that is all about censorship and preventing people from reading things that might be dangerous. So it aggravates me incredibly that people try to challenge and ban books that they haven't even read. You know, like, there's a gay couple in the background of this story, therefore it's terrible. And we've got to ban it because can't let people see representation. I could rant about this quite a bit, and I try not to turn this into a ranting video, but I can't not rant a little bit about censorship because it's so aggravating to me. And the reasons given, I'll link to the American Library Association, and they've got a lot of great information on this, but if you read the reasons given for challenging books, it's often, quite frankly, absurd. And I should point out too that when it comes to challenging books, and then this was a blind spot for me as I was learning more about this. Like, I've always thought of it as like super religious right is doing all of this challenging, and they are. Don't get me wrong, they are. But there are also a lot of more like left-leaning folks who are also challenging books because they've got religious themes, or like the Bible is a book that, the Christian Bible is a book that has been on the challenge list a surprising amount, actually. And to me, even though I don't agree with everything that is in every book, I mean, you can't, you're not going to. I don't believe that you should make it unavailable. And I do think that there's a big difference too between what is age appropriate and what is generally appropriate. And this is where school libraries can run into challenges where, is this middle grade book actually appropriate for middle grade students? And I mean, it's a middle grade book, and your objection to it is because it presents ideas that you disagree with. That's not the same as that's not the same as being harmful to that age group. So that is my rant about that. So related to censorship, so you may not be able to get a wide enough variety of books in your library. Library systems also are funded from a couple of sources. There is government funding, yes, but not a ton, I learned, which is interesting. A lot of their funding comes from fundraising and from grants, which they have to apply for. Either way, a library that is in a less affluent area is going to have access to less money, which is really unfortunate because then the population that they're serving has less access to not only books, but also other programs such as literacy programs and reading groups and all sorts of stuff like that libraries provide. So support your library. Do that. Why not just buy a book? Well, yes, however, the cost of books has gone up quite significantly. I was looking on my own wish list and for books, and the most expensive book on there is like $45. And that's a hardback, but still, $45 for a book is not actually a small amount of money considering the price of everything has gone up. That's not going to get into that economic rant. There are used bookstores. Not everyone has a good local used bookstore. Not everyone has easy access. I know that I come from a place of privilege. And I know I've got a massive bookshelf behind me, which I've put together over the years. A lot of these books I bought used because I'm lucky enough to live near used bookstores where the prices are actually quite nice and quite low. But then a number of them are new as well. Not everyone has that access, which again, is where libraries are supposed to come in, but that doesn't always give you the access that you should have either. I wrote myself a script and I kind of went off it a little bit, but I hit the key points. So to sum up, a lot of stuff gets in our way of reading, and that is really unfortunate. And some of those things we can control and some of them we cannot. And so I would just encourage all of you to think about in your own life what is getting in your way of reading. And if you know someone in your life who is lamenting that they don't have as much reading time or don't read as much as they want to, maybe help them figure out how they can carve out some time for themselves. Maybe read with them, do a buddy read, do a book club, drive together to the library, lend them some of your books, however you can help. And if you want to get involved more massively, support your local bookstores, support your libraries, either with time and money if you have that, or even just borrowing books or taking advantage of library programs, which are all free, gives them the membership numbers that helps them get more money that they need to fund those things. So if people aren't using the programs, it's harder to get money to fund them. That's capitalism. And I don't want to imply that we're living in some dystopian hellscape where literacy has just gone out the window, because that is simply not the case. For you, take time to read, and I hope that you love the next book that you read. And regardless of whether you read 12 books a year, 15 books a year, or 1 book a year, or 80 books a year, doesn't matter. Reading is winning, and I'll see you in the next one.